Hello, I'm Ollie, and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, all of the above, it's my February wrap-up. Now, when I did my January wrap-up, I did one of those things that feels like a good idea at the time, but with the benefit of hindsight, it wasn't. And that is that I ranked all the books that I'd read in the month. So I listed them in order of goodness from bad to fantastic. And because I did that last month, I feel like I should keep doing it every month. People seem to enjoy it, and actually it was quite fun for me to do. Unfortunately, this month I've read more books, and I've read such a variety of books this month that it's proven to be very, very difficult to do that. So I'm gonna attempt to do it now. I have got 29 books to talk about, so despite it being a short month, it was a busy month for me reading wise, and yeah, quite a range of things. So I read a few kind of non-fiction and political books this month, which is unusual for me. Well, unusual since I started BookTube anyway. I do quite like that kind of thing, but I haven't read that much of it recently. Before I get into the books I did read, let's quickly talk about the books I didn't read. So these three and one other were on my TBR for the month. So Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stewart, Return of the King by J R Tolkien, and Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, along with Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I didn't get to any of those. I just wasn't. I did try both Gone Girl and Shuggie Bain. Gone Girl, I should say, I've read before, so that was for the Killer Reads book club that I had it, that AJ Dunn Reads and Writes runs. I read it when it first came out and really liked it. When I started reading it again, I found I could just remember it very clearly, and given that it's a book that depends on its twists and turns to keep it interesting, I just didn't feel it was worth the effort of reading it again. Shuggie Bain I tried and just couldn't get into. I just wasn't in the right mood for it. I mean, people seem to love this book, so I'm sure I will read it at some point. And Return of the King I didn't even try in the end, but I'll definitely read it at some point in the future, because I really enjoyed the first two in the series. And then Daisy Jones and the Six, similarly, I just wasn't in the mood for, so I didn't get to it. So as I said in my March TBR video, I'm kind of prioritising shorter, easier to read books at the moment, in order to hit my 100 book target a bit faster. I'm pretty determined to try and finish the challenge in March, so we'll see how I do. But anyway, February's been a very productive month, and I got through a lot of stuff. So let's go through then from worst to best. So if you watched my last weekly wrap-up video, and apologies, there will be a bit of an overlap as there always is between these weekly and monthly videos. So the worst book I read this month was without a doubt Which Is When It All Began by Adele Abbott, which is the first of the Witch PI mysteries, of which there's like a couple of dozen now. So I read that for the Urban Fantasy Week in February Fantasy Stories, which is a fantastic event. The other three books I read for February Fantasy Stories were much better. This one I read purely because it was the only urban fantasy book that I had that met the criteria of being under 200 pages, and it was really bad. It's about this young woman who is a PI who then finds out she's a witch. The author just did a terrible job of making any of it even vaguely convincing. I know books of that kind shouldn't necessarily be convincing, but this just felt so inconsistent and nonsensy that I just didn't enjoy it at all. It could have been fun. You know, the idea of a witch being a PI is kind of fun in a charmed sort of a way. But yeah, I didn't enjoy it at all. Next up then, so the second to worst book of the month was Raiders of Gore by John Norman, which was just boring. So there was a bit of pirate stuff in this, which was kind of fun, but there was just loads of talk about like civilization and society and stuff like that, and very little action. So yeah, it was. There seemed to be less of the dodgy kind of sexual politics stuff than there has been in some of the other books. So it didn't get a black mark for that, but it did get marked down just for being quite dull. I really quite struggled with it, so we'll see how I get on with the next Gore book in the series. Next up then was Blood Beast Mutations by Carl John Lee, which is a short horror novella. which was fine. It was fun. It's kind of written in response to the Trump administration's approach to coronavirus restrictions in the US. So like a COVID-like infection is running rampant through the US. The government are in complete denial about it, and then it starts mutating into something more akin to the sort of thing you get in a horror movie. So there are like blood-sucking monsters that come out of people's bodies and stuff like that. So it was very silly, but quite entertaining. And I think, you know, the author had written it with the right intentions, and he'd written it from a point of anger about mismanagement of the COVID crisis in the US. But yeah, I mean, it was fine. It was fun, but it wasn't brilliant. Next then was Nightwing by Martin Cruz Smith. So again, near the bottom of the pile for the month. Again, it was fine. I gave it 3 stars. It's you know, a reasonably entertaining horror novel about a kind of rural community in the States that is beset by a plague of vampire bats. There were some really interesting characters in it, and some good, you know, individual scenes, but it just didn't hang together and really grip me as a novel. The horror scenes weren't as horrible as they could have been. As I say, there are a couple of really good scenes. There's some good flashback scenes about one of the characters who's kind of become a bat hunter, so about how he lost his father to bats. So that was quite fun. But aside from that, it didn't grip me as much as I'd expected it to. So it was okay, but not brilliant. Next then we have an Edge book, so A Town Called Hate, which is book 13, I think. Yeah, book 13 in the Edge series. So this was an entertaining, brutal Western. It did have some really enjoyably gory scenes in it. So there's like a woodmill and stuff like that. Was this the one with the woodmill? I think this is the one with the woodmill. So yeah, it was very, very gory. And quite entertaining, but you know, nothing particularly outstanding as far as the Edge books go. So a fun read, but not brilliant. Next up, we have one of the non-fiction books I read. So we need to talk about Putin by Mark Galeotti. So this, you know, clearly I read in response to current, you know, events in current affairs of recent days. And the appalling invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So it was an interesting book about Vladimir Putin, about, you know, what motivates him and things like that, and about how the West continually misunderstands him. Written by someone who was the Moscow correspondent for one of the British newspapers, I forget which, for a long time. So it was, you know, written from a point of knowledge, and it was interesting, but I couldn't help feeling that, I don't know, it's one of those books where it may be the most insightful thing about Putin ever, but I just don't know enough about the situation and him as a person to really judge. So it felt credible. It was certainly interesting to read, but I'm not sure how accurate it really was. Next up, a bit of pulp. So The Thousand-Headed Man, the Doc Savage novel by Kenneth Robeson. So this was a very entertaining adventure. With lots of kind of flying around the world, exotic weaponry, you know, lots of planes, lots of different locations and things like that, and Doc Savage and his merry band taking on a kind of evil cult. It definitely lost marks for me in terms of being horrifically of its time, in terms of being extremely racist. But aside from that, it was a fun adventure. And I think, you know, as I said in my video about why I read trash, you know, this was a book where the fun elements for me outweighed the objectionable ones. So yeah, an entertaining read despite the racism. Next up, a horror novella, Broken Shells by Michael Patrick Hicks, which is, as I said in my weekly wrap up, had one of the most fantastic kind of setups of any book I've read for a while. So about a guy who's kind of down on his luck, who gets a like a ticket that suggests he's won £5,000 off a car, goes to the car dealership to try and claim the prize, and things very rapidly go south, and it flips on a pin from being feeling very, very commonplace and normal, and you think you know where it's going, to being a completely wild and surreal horror novel. And reminding me a little bit of House of a Thousand Corpses, the Rob Zombie movie, the kind of real feeling of kind of nightmarish, you know, surrealism that's in that. So yeah, it was very entertaining. It becomes a bit more pedestrian towards the end, a bit more of a kind of action horror thing, but it was a lot of fun. I did enjoy it. Next up, another non-fiction one, and I have to confess I haven't actually finished this book yet. I'm more than halfway through. I'll definitely finish it today. I'm filming this on the 28th. I did tell Michael K. Vaughan off last month, I think, when he posted his wrap-up video before the end of the month, and I was like, well, how can you possibly do that when the month hasn't even finished? But I'm confident I won't finish any books apart from this one this month, and I'm pretty confident in where I'm putting it ranking wise. So the book is Shockaholic by Carrie Fisher, so one of her memoirs. It's very entertaining so far. It is quite shocking at times in terms of some of the things she talks about, but as you'd expect from Carrie Fisher, very amusing as well, and certainly quite heartfelt at times. And given her death not that long ago, you know, it feels quite poignant to be reading it now. So yeah, and interesting and entertaining kind of showbiz bio. Guess what? I was wrong to say that my opinion of the book wasn't going to change, because it has done. So I finished it yesterday. It's the 1st of March today. Finished the book, and actually the second half was much better than the first. The first half I enjoyed, the second half I enjoyed even more. And certainly the final quarter, which was particularly about Carrie Fisher's relationship with her father, was incredibly moving and really heartwarming and lovely. So as a result, I am bumping this one up the rankings. I will come back at the end of the video and tell you where it fits in once I've done the rest of the positions. Okay, see you later. Bye. So yeah, that was quite fun. Something completely different next. So another one I read for February Fantasy Stories. So At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft. So this was a reread for me. It was one of the very first Lovecraft stories I read way back in my teens. I enjoyed it, but I did think it was too long. So you probably know it's about an expedition to the Antarctic that uncovers like a lost city that's been built by followers of Cthulhu. There's a lot that's really, really good about it. It's fantastically imaginative. Lovecraft does some wild things in terms of the way he really draws you into the story and really makes you believe that the crazy things you're reading about, you know, may really have happened. But it was just too long and too detailed in places, so it did drag for me. I think, you know, from memory, some of the other stuff is much better, and I will read more of his stuff again soon. So yeah, it was good, but yeah, but not brilliant. So one position above Lovecraft, I'll probably get told off by Michael K. Vaughan for this. So Vegas Vendetta, book 9, I think it is, in the Executioner series. This was a really fun book. So Mack Bolan in Vegas, taking on the mob, teaming up with a comedian who's basically, the mob are trying to get into the entertainment business and are grinding the comedian down as a result. So he teams up with Mack Bolan to try and get his revenge. It was just pure entertainment from beginning to end. Unlike At the Mountains of Madness, which was brilliant in many ways but dragged in others. This moved very, very quickly and was very enjoyable. So yeah, I'm sure many people will disagree with that particular ranking, but there we go. Next up, The Drive-In by Joe R Lansdale. So again, this was a reread for me. I have done a video review of this, which is going up at some point. I think it's going up next week. So this is a really crazy kind of bizarro horror novel about a group of friends who go to a huge drive-in, which then gets cut off from the rest of civilization, and things rapidly take a turn for the worse. So yeah, very, very violent, very crazy. It's absolutely bonkers, really surreal and nightmarish at times. A very entertaining book and quite different from how I remembered it, I have to say. But yeah, that was a good one. One step above that, we have 6 Stories by Matt Wazalowski. So again, I've done a video review for that, which I think will have gone up by the time this video does. So watch that if you want to know more about the book, but a really entertaining mystery with kind of supernatural elements to it as well. which is told in the form of a podcast. So a really clever use of style. It works very well as a way of telling a story, and I'm looking forward to reading more books in the series. There are a number of other books in the series. In fact, I'm going to be reading 2 of them in March for March Mystery Madness. One point ahead of that, so The Gods of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, the second of the Barsoom novels. So, fantastically enjoyable kind of science fiction, fantasy adventure with John Carter on Mars fighting all sorts of people. Some fantastic scenes of kind of ultra-violence with just, thousands of people fighting. It reminded me a lot of the end of The Age of Ultron, the second Avengers movie, where you've just got that huge fight scene that seems to go on forever. There's one sequence in Gods of Mars that was very similar to that. So yeah, definitely high entertainment from Edgar Rice Burroughs. One step above that, The Man from London by Georges Simenon, so a crime novel from the 30s, I think it was. Really engaging tale of an ordinary man who sees an opportunity and takes it and pays the price, basically. So gets involved in some very shady stuff, and his life, rapidly deteriorates as a result. So one of those great sort of tales of retribution and morality, I suppose. But yeah, very good, and definitely one I would recommend. Something completely different above that. So another novel in translation though. So Fair Play by Tove Jansson, who's a Finnish writer. So I can't remember when this was published. I think in the 80s or 90s. As I said in the my weekly wrap up on it, it's a very gentle book. It's not like the kind of thing I normally read at all. So about the friendship between 2 women, and a lot, large portions of the book are just kind of conversations between the 2 women. But there's something about the way it's written that really pulls you in, and it just feels very real, very human, very moving, very charming. It was just a really lovely book. Above that, another bit of non-fiction. So I just finished this one yesterday. So this is Jews Don't Count by David Baddiel. So Americans probably don't know David Baddiel, but he's very well known in the UK as a kind of comedian and football fan as well. So I used to have a football TV show, which was kind of a mix of sports commentary and comedy, and also very famously Jewish. And this is a book by him about the fact that Jewish racism against Jewish people isn't taken as seriously as other forms of racism often. A very convincing argument, he lays out in the book. Tons of examples, very engagingly written, very funny at times. He's a comedian, and he's definitely got a very skillful comic touch, but had some really interesting points to make as well. So yeah, very interesting book, easy to read, but a difficult and important message. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed that and found it very interesting. Above that, more non-fiction. So on Anarchism by Noam Chomsky. So I have now managed to answer the eternal question, which is better, Noam Chomsky or McDowell? And the answer is Noam Chomsky. So Chomsky, obviously a very famously left-wing intellectual. This is a book by him that it kind of collects 5 different pieces by him about anarchism, which it turns out is kind of not his take on anarchism. His description of anarchism is very different from kind of my imagination of anarchism, in that it isn't just about having no rules. It's about a different way of structuring society, really, where everybody in the kind of socialist communist sense owns their own labour, and equally bands together to create things, really, and to run society. So yeah, really interesting book. Parts of it were very hard going in terms of being much cleverer than me, and feeling quite academic, but other parts of it were really accessible. So there's a couple of sections which are basically interviews with Chomsky, where he just talks about his views to the interviewer, and those were very easy to digest and understand. I think I made a bit of a pig's ear of actually explaining what the book was about, but I found it very interesting. Okay, above that we have The Secret World of the Sex Witches by Billson. So this was just pure silly smutty entertainment. I really enjoyed it so much. So it's a book about a young woman who gets possessed by a sex witch, and meets various other people who've been possessed by sex witches as well. And you know, that gives her a kind of insatiable lust for all sorts of different sexual activities. So it was extremely rude, very funny, all written, you know, completely tongue-in-cheek, but very silly and entertaining. I thoroughly recommend it. It's available on, it's not available in paperback, it's only a novella, but you can get it on Kindle or on Smashwords. Anne Billson is a writer I talked about before, whose work I really enjoy. This was very different from our other books, but very entertaining. Right, stop. This is where Shockaholic by Carrie Fisher should be. If I'd finished it before I filmed the video, this is where I would have put it in the rankings. So remember that and scrub all memory of where it was previously from your minds. Above that, we got 2 books back to back by George Orwell. So the first was Animal Farm. So again, this was a reread for me. I read this, I guess, again, when I was in my teens. So, you know, a famously smart allegory about the Soviet Union, and, you know, the failure of communism in Russia, told, you know, through the story of some animals taking over the farm that they live in. It manages to be, you know, deep and insightful and thoughtful and digestible and entertaining all at the same time. So, you know, justifiably a classic. I did enjoy reading it again. I didn't think it was amazing, and maybe that's because it's just one of those books that gets talked about so much that, you know, you kind of know where it's going. And, you know, obviously I've read it before as well, so it didn't blow me away, but I did enjoy it. And then above that, also by Orwell, Homage to Catalonia. So I was inspired to read this by the Noam Chomsky book, because there was a long section in that about the Spanish Civil War and the fact that during the Spanish Civil War in the province of Aragon, there was an anarchist, I don't know what the word is, an anarchist commune society that existed, you know, quite successfully for an extended period. So yeah, Orwell's, so the book is about Orwell's experience as a fighter in the Spanish Civil War. Absolutely fascinating, very moving at times, but also very thoughtful, and, you know, really made me think about what things are worth fighting for. You know, why it's so important for all of us to make a stand against things we disagree with. Yeah, and, you know, felt particularly well, I think I read it just before the invasion of Ukraine, but it, you know, it feels particularly poignant now with, you know, with that going on, and with, you know, people in Ukraine standing up to fight against the invading Russians. You know, it definitely feels like there's similarities between that and the Spanish Civil War in terms of, you know, ordinary people fighting oppressors. So yeah, a very interesting book and definitely worth reading. Above that, and again, you know, is this next book, Elric of Melnibone, a better book than Homage to Catalonia? Probably not, in all honesty, but I enjoyed it more, and it is a fantastic book. So again, I read this for February Fantasy Stories, a brilliantly imaginative, very dark fantasy story about this kind of cursed prince going on a voyage and attacking another city. It's just full of such stark, wonderful imagery. As I say, really bleak, really dark, really gloomy, but fantastically imaginative and very enjoyable. And again, I'm looking forward to reading more of the Elric books. Above that, we have Confessions by Kinae Minato. So I've done a video review of this one, which is up already. So a very bleak Japanese kind of crime/horror novel about a teacher who addresses her class to tell them that she's poisoned them because 2 of the children in her class were responsible for the death of her daughter. So yeah, a mind-blowing opening, and the book just gets darker and more disturbing after that. Absolutely fantastic. Really enjoyed it. A very interesting and gripping kind of, as I say, a mix of crime and horror, really, but, you know, completely gripping. So we are up to the top 3 now. So I've actually ranked 3 books in the 3rd place and put them all together. That's the first 3 books in the Blackwater saga, by Michael McDowell. So those are The Flood, The Levee and The House. So a fantastic Southern Gothic story. I'm really enjoying it. I've got the next 3 books to read, which I think going to read in March. I think I forgot to mention them in my March TBR, but I think I'm definitely going to read them in March because the story is so good. So there's elements of horror in each of the episodes or each of the books in the series, but it's much more just about the society in the south of America, or south of the US, in the late 20s and 30s. About this kind of southern matriarch and how she treats her family, and how the town kind of rally together to do certain things to protect themselves. Just absolutely fascinating. I'm really enjoying it, and very interested to see where the horror elements end up taking the story. So yeah, if you've probably heard of the books, but if you haven't read them, I'd definitely recommend them. Above that, we have this book. So Daredevil Born Again, which I read for the Maybury Book Club. So again, this was a reread for me. I read this in my teens, to hunt around in the attic to find this old copy of mine, which I bought back in the 80s. Just fantastic, a fantastic piece of comic book storytelling, which takes its hero Daredevil and completely beats him up, basically. So his arch enemy, the Kingpin, kind of completely destroys Daredevil's life, and his alter ego Matt Murdock's life, and takes him all the way down to the gutter, down to rock bottom, and then he fights his way back up from there. So really rousing stuff. Fantastic illustrations, just real power to the storytelling, and the mix of words and pictures works brilliantly for it. So a truly excellent superhero story, one that I very much enjoyed. So that leaves us with the number 1 spot, which is Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. So a book that is not crime, nor horror, nor pulp, something completely different from any of those things. So a very moving and fascinating story about 2 women. So one a kind of female aviator in the 1930s, I think I want to say. I think it's set in the 30s, who is trying to, I can't remember if she's circumnavigating the world or just flying between 2 very distant points, and goes missing. So the story about how she became an aviator, how she learned to fly, and that build up to that flight, and then also the story of a young actress in the present day who's making a film about the life of this female pilot who went missing on this her final flight. And about this actress investigating, what happened on that flight. Just beautifully written, just a really engaging story, wonderful storytelling, wonderful characters. I really couldn't fault it. It was a really, truly excellent book. It's a long book, 600 pages long, but I couldn't put it down. I absolutely loved it. So yeah, that's my ranking of 29 books for February. So a very busy month for me, reading wise, and a very mixed month as well. I think it was definitely a very difficult job, ranking some of those books against each other. I'm sure if anybody wants to try and do, anyone who's read any of the books who wanted to rank them themselves would probably come up with very different orders to me. But hey, that's, everyone's got their own opinion, haven't they? So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. Anyway, do let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them. Let me know if you agree or violently disagree with my ordering of things. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you're all safe and well, and I will speak to you again soon. Cheerio.